Hello detectives, I would like to welcome a new sponsor to the Noir Club. NordVPN has joined in supporting our endeavors and sponsored this video. If you don't know what NordVPN is, it's one of the leading VPNs or virtual private networks in general. NordVPN can hide your IP, allow you to access content with certain geo or school blocking, and allow us to visit some of those unscrupulous websites. I mean you know the ones. Point being, maybe you're just paranoid about people seeing your IP address. And that's fair. NordVPN can help you there. Most importantly, if you are a content creator, streamer, or play games in general, you can protect from DDoS attacks and potentially get a ping increase. I currently use NordVPN as many other people do, and haven't had any issues regarding the service, and installation and use was easy and painless. Thanks for supporting the channel, and thanks for sponsoring this video, NordVPN. Alright detectives, back to the video. The first month of an MMORPG launch is really a magical experience. If you haven't had the chance to experience one for yourself, I really recommend it. There's nothing quite like the first month of an MMO launch. Things are fresh, new and exciting, and most importantly, you have the peak population and excitement upon launch. But there's a downside and a heavy price that comes with the first month of an MMO. And while some have experienced the beauty of such, others have surely experienced the horrors of MMO launches. They are in fact responsible for some of the worst launch experiences in gaming period, due to their always online nature. So it sort of comes with the territory. In this video editorial we will cover this and more, including some examples of good or bad launches, and ultimately why I believe there is so much importance and significance in the first month of an MMORPG. The reason the launch for an MMORPG is so particularly special is based on a concept I dubbed grand opening, which no, I didn't invent. It just is an apt comparison, which basically just means that when a social location like a restaurant, a building, a new city, or in this case a game, an MMO, has a grand opening, part of how they get sales and people interested in the product or the place is through hype, or what's called FOMO. Hype because, well, it's a shiny new thing, and more importantly, a shiny new place. This means to get people in the door, metaphorically speaking, in the case of an MMO, you need hype to bring them in. Part of what builds an MMO launch into crazy heights is based on part on how the games are designed. For starters, they are a genre with massive in the name, so naturally they will be a bit more massive than the standard multiplayer game. But more importantly, you have these massive amount of players wanting to come together to create a massive amount of experiences. And specifically for this video, no experience is more novel or hype-inducing than experiencing a title or experience for the first time. But this is kind of a catch-22, because while a bunch of players are rushing to a newly formed MMO world, aka a MMORPG, all excitedly at once, and that sounds like fun, it's also a historical recipe for disaster, with developers feeling the wrath of under-preparation, in advanced and complicated tech, and finally the hungry player base just taxing the server until it crashes. No example greater than this than Anarchy Online in my opinion, which was a sci-fi MMORPG that launched back in 2001. When Funcom launched Anarchy Online, they had severe desync issues, disconnection issues, and kept just about everyone from playing the game. You could even get stuck inside of instances, like shops or dungeons, indefinitely. Funcom would apologize for these issues and ask for a press to hold back on reviewing the game until they could iron things out. And this would carry on for months, making Anarchy Online's launch truly one of the worst for an MMORPG. I have covered Anarchy Online on the Death of a Game series, and the most interesting part about their story is that they didn't fail at launch. In fact, they went on to have a 20-year-plus career being quietly one of the longest-running and most successful MMORPGs of all time. The bad examples are way more common than the good examples for launches, so it's much easier to find an MMO with a horrible launch than a good one. They aren't trendy at the moment, but Blizzard has had a few of these World of Warcraft expansions and WoW Classic launches that kinda went pretty smoothly. But I think the smoothest launch doesn't really come from the MMORPG field exactly, but it kind of technically does, depending on how you classify it, is going to the augmented reality world on mobile phones. Pokemon Go's launch was quite magical in recent memory back in July of 2016. As an augmented reality game that utilized the real-world map with unique points of interest, it was filled with players traversing the world with their phones out, working together, and experiencing a new world for the first time. As with the tweet and subsequent responses highlight, Pokemon Go's launch was an experience for many reasons. Being the most popular franchise certainly helped, but the game being built with cooperation and player interactivity in mind is really the key. We just recently covered the Harry Potter offshoot of Pokemon Go, and highlighted in that video how the game would fail due to an inability to generate the same level of hype and excitement in the game it was trying to emulate. In a sense, if you can survive this initial first month of onslaught, your chances are indeed much better for success. But the problem is, launch in an MMORPG isn't just one or a few days. That's why we made this video after all. Note, in MMORPG, the first entire months are seen as the launch of the game. It's an ongoing affair, and the game becomes more known to everybody during this time. So that means you can't just look at the days after a launch. Instead, in an MMORPG, which is designed for long-term progression, you need to look at the months after launch. So technically I could have named this video the first months of an MMORPG, but that doesn't sound as sexy. As players progress more and more into the game in an MMORPG starts to open out and become far more in-depth as you progress towards the endgame. So with this process, aka the leveling process, arguably one of the most important processes in an MMORPG, or the endgame process itself are lackluster, it will be reflected in the drop in population numbers that come in the months following. We've got another example. Look no further than New World, who went from 913,000 players peak to 77,000 players just 24 hours ago. New World looked good visually and had the backing of a huge player in Amazon, but players were too eager to celebrate the success of the game when it reached its near million-person peak. This is natural, as we have discussed, due to how hype works and a new world being essentially created. But the problem is more that players seem so sure of how things will go success-wise without waiting to see how the first month or two shakes out fully. And, well, it shaked out for New World, just not in a good way. After the first month, they dropped nearly 66% of their population to 357,000, before following it up with another 46% drop to 145,000 players. Well wishes and positive thoughts won't change what I just mentioned, aka the new player experiences, or leveling, and the in-game experience both lead to a drop in players. And fixing these two things aren't as easy as just a content update or two. That's why I've been urging people since I've spoke about my thoughts on New World to caution their enthusiasm, as New World was completely unproven at the higher levels, including in my alpha and closed beta experiences. So the first month of an MMORPG serves as more than just a hype train, a FOMO craze, fear of missing out, and whatever other exaggerations you can classify it as such. It's a period of time where you can carefully examine how an MMORPG will do long term, especially when the patterns often repeat themselves. That's what we showcase in the Death of a Game series, the largest contributing factors for an MMORPG's death. And oftentimes it's very similar things. Things you can go back with the bonus of hindsight and see the cracks forming during those early months. My point isn't just to take the wait and see approach either, which isn't really a point, it's just rather obvious. It's more that people who seem to claim they know that an MMORPG will do well before statistics match that is just kind of foolhardy, and at this point, kind of pointless. We should know as MMORPG players that if an MMO can show us with proof it can do well in a few months, that means with active players, not just the players that logged in a single time, then you should feel good about knowing your title is probably going places. But MMORPGs are very lock and key with population data, understandably, right? Which makes it fortunate that some games like New World are released on Steam, so we have access to that data. Without objective measures of population data, it's hard to know how many people are playing an MMORPG. And more importantly, after the first month or two of an MMORPG, are still playing it, because that burnout rate is always based on an issue or issues that come from the game. So while I explain there is plenty of good reasons to get hyped up in a MMORPG launch, especially to experience it for yourself, I caution everyone on proclamations of a game's success until the numbers come out basically, or at least until a few months have passed. Something we haven't mentioned yet either, which complicates things a little bit, is that no single MMORPG has the same kind of first month of a launch either. Sure, literally, but even figuratively in the sense that two MMORPGs can be so different from each other, with such a large overarching genre tag. For example, a theme park MMORPG or an MMORPG can afford to have a lackluster launch because the game isn't as nearly reliant on emergent experiences and players to create the content. In fact, theoretically an MMORPG designed in this way can function with as little as a few hundred players. A sandbox MMO though? Well, that feeds more into the issues we have already covered thus far. Players are paramount to making content and the experience unique in a sandbox MMO. So without players, that's just not gonna happen. So a sandbox or a truly massive style MMORPG really needs to nail the first month of launch in order to carry that momentum going forward. Even more so than the theme park style made famous by World of Warcraft, now passing the torch to Final Fantasy XIV. Succeeding the first month of an MMORPG takes more than careful planning and good preparation. It takes an understanding of what it takes to create and maintain a new world, and serves as arguably the most pivotal point for such. What are some of your worst launch experiences? Or which do you think have been some of the worst period even? What about any good or positive experiences? What has been your favorite MMORPG launch? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, Stay curious, detectives. Thanks for watching.